greatest form of control is where you think you're free when you're being fundamentally manipulated and dictated to. One form of dictatorship is being in a prison cell and you can see the bars and touch it. The other one is sitting in a prison cell but you can't see the bar, you think you're free. What the human race is suffering from is mass hypnosis. We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
And yes, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Red Pill Hardcore TV show. I'm your host V, as usual, and I would love to thank you guys again for all of your support in this TV show. The network, TLBTV, is booming. There are lots of good things coming in the future. You notice if you watched the last episode. And, you know, we could really use your help spreading the word. If you're watching this right now, please share this to your Facebook page. Share in groups. We need all the extra attention we can get. TLBTV is a small TV network, but it's the only major independent TV network that is 100% volunteer all the way through. Our efforts are very large. They make a deep impact. So, with that said, I am finally glad and very honored to have Dr. Matthew Aaron on my show. I've actually shared an episode with him on the Ella Free podcast, and the things he had to say was, spectacular. He had a lot of information and just information on get-togethers as well. We gotta march, we gotta rally, we gotta get together, we gotta get our voices out there, we gotta be seen. Standing in front of town hall, standing in front of capital city buildings, just doing everything that you can to let these people know that we're not happy. They gotta see it. They really gotta see it. We can't be subdued underneath such horrendous social constructs that we're being forced to deal with on a daily basis. So, yeah, without further ado, yes, I have Dr. Aaron Matthew. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. I'm just so glad to finally get you on the show. I'm really happy. It's nice to have a little validation from people in the professional, especially medical community, who are experiencing these operations, covert operations, psychological operations that are government funded. Some people say that some of this comes from private sector. I don't doubt any of that. Everything's connected. Especially when you have pseudo Freemasons trying to run the world. So, what do you think about that?
Well, as you know, with targeting, there's a few different sources of information. And one of the best sources of information is from your own experience. And then you can listen to the testimonies of others and connect those with your experience. And in my case, I've taken what I've heard from the bioeffects that are reported, and I've gone in and done literature searches to see if those connect with known effects of radio frequency. But in my personal experience, from my targeting, it seemed to be more of a private sector criminal organization in my case. But of course, given the huge scale of targeting, it seems like a lot of different organizations, including people with government connections, have their fingers in this, I believe.
Okay. I believe you actually mentioned that as well in your presentation for the Hope and Unity Conference held in Boston. This is actually your second appearance on my show, as I actually put your conference material into the show.
Oh, great.
So, yes, for those who are watching and have missed that, please go back into the Red Pill Hardcore TV show archive and go and watch it. It's a 3-part episode. Yes, so here you are on the Red Pill Hardcore.
Yes, it's great to be here.
You got an agenda, something extra to say, something that you haven't said yet, something you want to harp on even more?
I don't really have an agenda. I was going to let you kind of steer that, but if you guide us into what topics you want to discuss, I do have a lot to say.
Okay, well, I'm all about free speech, and I'm a real journalist. I mean, I'm not Hannity cutting off my interviewee every time he opens his mouth just to control the narrative, to pollute, the minds of the viewers who are watching. I truly believe in getting this information out. So I mean,
I will start by echoing how you started this show, and that is that people getting active and people outside of the victim activist community who are becoming interested in this, getting the word out and being vocal about this. I mean, we need to step up our game more than we have. Now, fortunately, there's a never-ending slow tsunami of new victims coming and joining us. So we are growing, but we need to magnify and force multiply. And the only way we're going to break this thing is by getting a critical mass of people in the general public being outraged by what's going on.
Agreed. And, I really want my audience to get acquainted with you. And it's excellent. It's so fantastic with your training. Please let everyone know your education, your background.
Well, I have a long scientific background. I'm actually still working in the biomedical sector after a hiatus of unemployment due to targeting. My background is in environmental toxicology, but then that was for a master's degree. I published a couple of papers in environmental toxicology, but then I went on to pursue a PhD in neurobiology and behavior at Cornell University. And for my research, I worked on weakly electric fish in Africa from a bunch of different angles. But those are specialists in bioelectricity. So I learned a lot about bioelectricity, and basically the reason that, in a nutshell, that radio frequency directed energy weapons, in addition to producing thermal pain, the reason that they're so devastating to people is because they have effects on bioelectric systems in the body. So when I was targeted, they didn't mess with someone who, I didn't go long confused about what was going on. In fact, the first time they really hit me, and when I say they, I don't like that term they. In my case, it was people directly across the alley in a building which I can name. I've named it many times. I'll name it again because it was 1190 Hornby Street in downtown Vancouver. I saw harassment activities going on. I became outraged by it, and this is what led to me getting targeted. And I even saw some cases where I believe that I witnessed the ground-based weapons that they were using. And so the first time they hit me, in targeting, oftentimes they start off with a low amplitude to try to not make it obvious. They try to mess with you in a almost subliminal or not an overt way. But after I confronted them directly, they hit me really hard, and then they continued to. And even on that first time, I made a big sign and held it up to my window. I said, "Are you firing microwaves at me?" So, I deduced pretty quickly that I was being hit with radio frequency weapons. I didn't even know about directed energy weapons, but just from the properties of the energy that was hitting me, how it was coming through the walls, how it was interacting with my bioelectric systems, my heart, my muscles, probably my brain sometimes when I had seizures induced by these weapons. So I had some relevant background that I think is relevant to understanding what's going on, and it certainly led me, I believe, to quickly understand what was going on. But of course, shielding is another matter. I mean, these weapons are incredibly difficult to shield against.
I would agree. Now, from the information you just provided, I have to ask, do you think, because of your knowledge, your wealth of knowledge, do you think that they tried to challenge you or to get rid of you because of that knowledge that you have? Because I can tell you, my targeting, it began as more of a psychological thing, mind game on top of mind game, and I studied psychology since I was in grade school. A very passionate interest of mine, and I immediately, just like you, I knew what was going on. Just when it started, okay, what is this tomfoolery? What's this malarkey? What's all this crap going on? Come real with it. I know what you're saying is not real, so come real with it. So you challenged that. So why fight against your strengths?
Well, just to jump back for a second, in all fairness, there was a period of 2 years where they were doing a lot more low-intensity psychological messing with me, but eventually enough was enough. And then when I confronted them, then the large mob attacks on the street began, and the probably military-grade anti-personnel weapons came out. And that's when they basically had me on the run, and I believe after I challenged them and made it clear that I was going to try to expose what they were doing, this is before I knew how big this system was. This is before the curtain was pulled back. But I think they just wanted to eject me from that area at that point. I'm not a Canadian citizen. They just wanted me gone from the city and probably from Canada. Before that, they were targeting me, I believe, or I infer, in that kind of way where they were treating me as a plaything and kind of, I don't know, it was almost cult-like, almost like a cult-like abusive, I call it a cult of abuse. That's what it felt like.
Satanic ritual abuse, yeah.
I'm sold on the satanic. These people, I had 2 years to watch what was going on in that building, and there were ritualistic things that I saw that my first feeling was I thought they were druids or Wiccans or something, but they did some ritualistic stuff that was theatrical and costumed, and even like Grim Reaper garbage. So they acted and looked like Satanists. I hate to go there because really I like to focus on the criminal. As far as Satanists don't break laws, I'm fine with them existing. As soon as they start abusing people, I have a problem with it.
I would agree. These people who are ritualistic, this is from a subcultured mindset. People with inferiority complexes, feeling that they can gain power from some sort of invoking. So,
well,
yeah.
Let's stay on this. Can we stay on this topic just for a second? Because
okay.
I don't think I have, more insights than any other TI, but I have certain insights because of the nature of, because of the physical, geographical, spatial circumstances of my targeting. I went for 2 years making observations of what looked like basically a headquartered type cluster of harassers that were taking part in this. And then you know, I can think back and say, okay, what did I see during those 2 years that maybe they didn't want me to see after I became kind of this resilient fighter? And I think that those ritualistic, satanic, for lack of a better word, a lot of that ritual, I believe, or I infer, that was actually meant to control the stalkers, because the stalkers are the ones that are generally privy to those rituals, not the victims. They do those rituals behind closed doors. So my guess, or my conclusion, is that that's the glue that holds the system together. It's held together on the inside by fear tactics.
I would have to agree. Absolutely. To stay more with the technology, I would love to hear your input on my movie. You watched my movie, right? And my presentation
yep.
on chemtrail mind control.
Yep, I watched the entire thing, yep.
Well, I mean, I don't claim to be an expert in anything except for being an expert researcher. Because, you know, that's something that we all got to do, and if you're going to be good at something, you got to be able to research. So I did my best to put together something that's comprehensible to the people. So, I mean, what do you think?
I was impressed. I'd like to make a qualifying statement before I can give you my feedback, but I will say that I believe that people like me, everyone has something different to contribute to our shared global cause. And being someone who has worked in mainstream science, and I even still have a job with an unnamed, let's just say I have a job with people that work in science at a high national level. I don't want to mention where, but I'm 100% committed to this cause. The only reason I don't want to mention where is because I could potentially get fired for doing so.
Okay.
And I want to remain nimble towards this cause by keeping my mainstream scientist's hat on. Okay, so I hope you can respect that. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So my feedback will be feedback from that perspective, and I won't diverge from that perspective, because I think as our cause gains more public awareness, I think I'll have a role to play by potentially being able to bridge mainstream people into the movement, if that makes sense. But in that, with that context in mind, I'll give you my assessment of what I saw.
Please do. From a professional.
Sorry?
I said from a professional. Yes, please.
Yes. I also like to. I keep my my interest in this electronic harassment, which is the mainstream word for, well, it's our mainstream word. Electronic harassment and the crimes involved in that are my main focus. The crimes and the costs of those crimes and the effects on victims. But I can't, it's hard to conclude or speculate too far on the grand mechanism. Well, there's probably a multitude of mechanisms, but I like to restrict my focus as well. So anyway, I've qualified enough. So for example, I have not had an interest in chemtrails very much. But I'll say one thing that I got from your documentary is that just watching your documentary makes me more intrigued or convinced that there is something going on that we're not being told about depositing chemical substances in the sky that deviate from what are known as contrails. And I have not been convinced, but I haven't put much research or time into it, but your documentary was enlightening in that regard.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If I can get to one person, at least one person, it's all worth it.
And then when you go on to make links to, I don't want to use words for you, but it basically seems like you're making hypothetical, and I'm saying that in terms of a hypothesis or a theory, links between chemtrail deposition and influences of radio frequency signals, including microwaves, on the human nervous system. That there's a link there that you're exploring in your video.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
That's obvious, right? So
yes.
that link. I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but that link involves nanotechnology, and you were using as analogies or as potential examples things like quantum computing, and even experiments at the quantum scale where they can use entanglement to transport photons basically over distances instantaneously.
Yes, information. Yes.
Information. Okay.
Yes.
So my scientific intuition. I'm a biologist by training. I'm not a physicist, so I can say I'm a well-trained biologist. I've published many papers in top science journals. I know advanced statistics, and there's certain things about those connections that are abrasive to my scientific intuition. But
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
No, I mean my scientific intuition, for example, tells me that things at the quantum level, some of those quantum experiments that you showed require temperatures near absolute zero. For example, well, human bodies are 37 degrees Celsius, so they're far above absolute zero. So quantum phenomena don't really operate at biologically relevant temperatures. I mean, those that you were showing in your... So basically, some of the connections... Now, I'm not ruling them out, but the jumps there are from a biologist's perspective, in the mainstream, gargantuan leaps of potential connections, which would require extraordinary evidence to demonstrate. But at the same time, I am glad that people are asking these questions, because there's no doubt that secret technology is being deployed, and secrecy is a very dangerous thing. Exploring some of these ideas, that's very tricky.
Well, yeah, the secrecy is very dangerous, and I wish JFK were around to, I wish JFK were around for us to ask him this very question. So what do we do about the secrecy? Well, people always know my answer about everything. People say that I'm too militant, but truly, we really gotta say, when enough is enough, we need to know what's going on, because there's new stuff being deployed on us all the time. Now, from the standpoint of a medical doctor, or of a biologist, what do you think about these frequencies? Like, for example, 5G. They're pushing this 5G now, and so isn't there some sort of a time period where these things have to be studied, effects on human beings for maybe 20, 30 years, something like that? There should be extensive data, extensive information on health effects. We're swimming in an ocean of frequencies that are not natural. We have rising cancer, mental illness, genetic disorders, so many things that are going wrong.
There's a clear case for regulatory lapses here, for sure. Basically, my understanding is that someone decided early on that radio frequency and microwave technologies' health effects would be regulated strictly based on thermal criteria. So they basically say, for example, cell phone use. A cell phone device has to be powered and shielded such that it will only raise your brain tissue by point whatever degrees Celsius over an hour of use. That's the only, so thermal criteria are the only way that these things are regulated. And we know that there's a lot of non-thermal effects, but I'm not sure how they decided. I'm not sure if it was just, to actually test the non-thermal effects. Speaking from I'm not defending industry here, but that would be incredibly costly to study. And so maybe they wanted to shortcut it that way, that they decided someone, I'm not an expert on the history of this, but I know for sure that they only regulate based on thermal effects, as if someone early on decided non-thermal effects are insignificant. Now, any targeted individual knows that that's not true. Not only do we get thermal effects, but we also get non-thermal effects like your body being induced into a massive seizure by pulsed energy field, for example, which happened to me a number of times. So that is a problem, and there's probably going to be a big backlash, and actually taking that, these people that are worried about cancer effects and teratogenic effects and basically the general health effects of, or detrimental health effects of EMF, we could ally ourselves with those, because that might be a place where these difficult questions are first asked. I think we should think of that camp as our allies, people that are against smart meters and so forth.
Okay, well, but I want to add on to that. There are the obvious effects of, just to go through the physics of this, there are waves of, particle beams, just waves in general, vibrating particles. If hitting your genes, your genetics, because our DNA strands spiral, they're made of those little molecules, right? It's like a shooting gallery when these beams come at us from cell phones, from whatever device. It can knock any of these genetic markers out of place. It can turn on genetic markers. It can turn some off. Right? I mean, and this is a problem.
I think that EMF might have gene regulatory effects, but the clearest target, and I'll point you toward the right literature, the clearest target in the body for these non-thermal effects are voltage-gated ion channels, in particular voltage-gated calcium channels. And a researcher by the name of Martin Paul at the University of... Are you familiar with him?
Yes. Well, he came up with he was touring, actually, about calcium efflux, which at the time I came across his name. I was just suffering so much from neck pain. I have chronic neck pain, and it's not natural. And with my connection with the remote neural monitoring satellites, all those effects, I used to get the surging of my spine, electricity from bottom of my spine into my brain, tortured in my sleep endlessly. And yeah, I've got neck pain from hell. So yeah, I found him in a couple of YouTube videos, actually, and he was talking about calcium efflux disease. So that was actually going to be my next question. I'm glad you brought it up. So what do you know about that? I mean, how can you validate that?
Well, I think he provides, in his review papers, he provides a list of evidence that is, stepping back for a second, these voltage-gated channels, which regulate calcium ion concentrations inside cells, they're also involved in sensory transduction in the eye, muscle contraction, heart beating. They're found all throughout the nervous system, and also hormone release from glands. So anything that might affect calcium channels could potentially have systemic effects. And I think that's what we see, is that basically these directed energy weapons can have system-wide effects. They have all kinds of different effects. But depending on where they hit and how the frequencies are tuned, they can have specific effects as well. So these channels have voltage sensors in them. And microwaves oscillate so rapidly, it's so much more rapidly than the time constant of these voltage sensors that open and close, that it was thought for a long time that it wasn't possible for microwave frequencies to interact with those little voltage sensors on those ion channels. But then I think if you pulse the microwaves at lower frequencies, you can start to couple with those sensors. And Martin Pall provides a whole range of suggestive evidence, multiple lines of suggestive evidence. Of course, doing the actual study that proves it beyond a doubt is very difficult, but he provides a very convincing case. Like, for example, short periods of EMF exposure change the calcium balance inside cells, which can't be explained in other ways, in controlled experiments. And I'm not 100% sure about all of his lines of evidence. I would have to go back and review that. But he draws from a lot of different sources of evidence to make a case for calcium channels being the primary target of non-thermal coupling. And if calcium channels are responding, it's possible that other voltage-gated ion channels are also responding to these. And that's the basis of our whole bioelectricity, are these ion channels.
Basically what it's all about, I think.
Go ahead. So I wanted to, let's talk about, because I take this very seriously. I don't want to be too much of the, I'm not being a naysayer.
I was going to say, you sound like a lawyer so far, more than the doctor. What? I was going to say, you sound more like a lawyer than a doctor today.
Scientists do kind of work that way. But basically, at its very core, and this is something that you should know strategically, is that mainstream science is, at its core, skeptical. And so when you propose something radical, and you're not taking those, science works in little steps, generally. And if you propose something that's a paradigm shift, you need to have extraordinary evidence in order to bring people on board with that. And targeting with radio frequency causing non-thermal effects is, to most people, an extraordinary claim. But I think there are good reasons for thinking something extraordinary is going on. For example, and let's go through that list of reasons, and I'll just start off, and then maybe you can join in. But for example, the reason that people think that there must be something extraordinary, like perhaps something related to the chemtrails, is that targeting seems to have an extraordinary ability to get you no matter where you are. And it's hard to explain that with people with ground-based weapons and radar tracking onto you all the time. It seems like maybe there's a system that is behind this that is much more sophisticated than that. And I take that very seriously, that because that is hard to explain. I mean, that's one of the driving motivations for you to be seeking possible explanations that connect these dots, for example.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Right.
And I agree as well. Because in order for an alternative to that is that these systems, and this crime has been in development for a few decades, and basically the cartels and secret organizations that are behind this have grown large. And an alternative is that there really are a lot of people scattered through society with these devices. And that's another way that they can kind of, once they, but they have to keep track of your position. I mean, when I was in Vancouver, they had an extraordinary ability to target me as I was trying to move around the city to get away from these sinister attacks. It was so I was leaning towards thinking, well, there's just people with devices everywhere in houses. Maybe there's a helicopter flying up high that I can't see, but still they had an ability to keep track of my location that was extraordinarily advanced, and I have no good explanation for how they pulled that off.
Well, okay, we have to take a quick pause for commercial break. I got a few good questions for you. Hold on.
Okay.
Hello, I'm B from the Red Pill Hardcore TV show, and I'm here to deliver a message to you. I am standing up, and I think you guys should stand up too. What are we standing up for? Clean air. The New World governments have been spraying aluminum, strontium, barium, all kinds of nanoparticulates, salts, heavy metals, and we are losing our environment. We have trees with aluminum toxicity. Our wildlife is disappearing, one species at a time. We have weather warfare weaponry. If there is anything such as global warming, well, we have ionospheric heaters that's dramatically bombarding our atmosphere. All this damage can be done to the environment by these nanoparticulates being sprayed into the atmosphere. We know that it's causing respiratory issues. We know that it's causing autism. We know that it's causing Morgellons, the transhumanistic disease. What else is it doing? I think it may just be altering our minds. Watch my movie, and then you decide. Alright, we are back. This is the Red Pill Hardcore still. I'm host V still, and I still have Dr. Aaron Matthew on the show with me. So right before the break, you said something extremely interesting, and when it comes to connecting those dots, you know, there are things put into place, and with my experience with the government, you know, I'm ex-DOD, and I come from a military family. There are secrets, but they're always put right in front of you. You know, something's put in front of you, you're told not to touch it. You ask what it's for, you lie to, and you end up, you know, doing something with this, and finding out later on it was potentially dangerous, or it was completely useless, and it was just something that puts your life in danger. So these things happen, and it's right in front of your eyes. So we have the satellite technology. The satellite technology is what keeps the world in time. The geosynchronicity, the down to the nanosecond. So global positioning is entirely possible for every human being on the planet. Now, this would have to operate under frequency bands that are covert, illegal to use, possibly hard to very well detect. So, a term kicked around by research TIs is scalar wave energy. As a biologist, there's the electromagnetic energy, but I don't know what terminology you want to use, but the effects of scalar waves, and is that something that is used in the scientific community as a norm? I mean, what's the standard here?
Well, again, I'm not a physicist, and I've of course looked into scalar waves to a very limited extent, and it's pretty clear that scalar waves are not discussed in mainstream physics.
Right, but you're absolutely right, which is why I'm asking. But scalar waves are supposed to be a special form of energy from bioelectromagnetics, operating on an extremely low ELF frequency.
Well, so all of the paradigms in neuroscience that I'm familiar with, that I used in my research, I should say none of them rely on scalar waves as part of their mechanism. So I never came across the concept of scalar waves through neuroscience channels. When I did limited looking, I found that they seem to be concepts that are not even part of mainstream physics. So that's kind of a brick wall for me. I don't even really know what a scalar wave is, other than I mean, in the near field of an electromagnetic emission, you get phenomena that some physicists would say this is what people mean when they say scalar waves. They're like near field effects, and I also know that they're not, according to people that are supporters or adherents to scalar wave thinking, belief, whatever you want to say, that you can't shield from these things. They can pass through materials as if they're completely transparent. So that's the extent of my knowledge. So I'm not really going to be able to provide any help.
Well, let me steer it a little bit more into your area of expertise.
Okay.
So, as a neurobiologist, I mean, you use EEG. I mean, you've used equipment like EEG, MEGs. You have to take certain readings.
Yeah.
For example, the brain neurons firing off measurements of microvolts and picotesla. Am I in the ballpark here?
For sure. Like, for example, one of the projects that I did was we tested tuning curves on the electroreceptors of electric fish, which are firing all the time, but their pattern of firing just varies. But they're related to the they're related to the hair cells in our ears. And for those recordings, we measured a little external field potential on those things, and we could see their firing pattern. And that was measured with an electrode in close proximity to the sensory cell. And yeah, we were measuring voltage changes through time with an electrode. An extracellular recording of a sensory cell.
Okay, and then that would actually wrap us back around to the concept of the telepathy. I mean, you stated having 0 degrees of temperature for some of these things, but telepathy has been well documented as a phenomenon that happens biologically within creatures with advanced brains. There's been a lot of research, and I believe a lot of technology comes from the research with the dolphins, their ability to communicate using telepathy or some form of echolocation, whatever they use.
They use sonar.
Sonar.
Yeah. Is your definition of telepathy a form of communication that's not standard sound? Because they're using. I thought telepathy meant sending messages without energy.
Well, even telepathy has energy, I think. Well, that's the point I'm getting to, though. These little fish, you can measure the output of the brain waves. I mean, we have brain waves that, the brain waves aren't stuck in our head when we have the thoughts. They would have to radiate, wouldn't they? Or are they contained in the skull completely?
No, they're clearly not contained. Actually, it's interesting that you bring this up because for the last 2 months, I've been working on a presentation that is the formal, full presentation that I wanted to give in Boston. And you're going to probably be interested. I'll be finishing it next weekend and uploading it to YouTube. I put a lot of time into it, and I give my personal view on these topics. Okay. And so I have an entire section of my presentation where I talk about how signals can be recorded from sensors outside the head at a short distance.
I hope you actually let me have that as a special on my TV network.
Okay.
All right.
It's very much, yeah, for sure. I mean, absolutely. But I come to the conclusion that there's strong constraints, biological constraints and physical constraints on the remote sensing of neural processes. Now, that's not to say there are really impressive human-machine interface technologies which sense biosignals and can and you even have devices that can, for example, sense intent or volitional effort. Okay, and these the publicly known technologies of these kinds all require sensors positioned close to the head. So if you want to call that telepathy, then yes, that's that technology does exist.
Well,
so
okay. Well, let me say this. What about the people who have experiences of, let's say, for example, a mother one day suddenly feels that her child, something bad, something horrendous has happened to her child. And, next thing you know, a few minutes later, she gets a call from someone saying that her child got into a bad accident and was in emergency intensive care, and they're on the other side of the world.
Well, I had a miniature version of this experience just tonight when I was anticipating your call, and I was relaxing, laying down after a long day of work, and then I had this feeling to get up, and just as I got up, you phoned me from Poland. So now, a statistician and a mainstream scientist would say that human experiences are highly susceptible to confirmation bias, which clouds our view of these things. That basically, when a situation like this, basically you're having random occurrences all the time. Now, in the example I presented, it wasn't even that random because we already had arranged that this was going to be the time that you were around when you were going to call. But it still seemed like I had that feeling because I felt the need to get up, and right that second is when you phoned me. But the way that a scientist would explain this is that there are these random occurrences all the time, and sometimes you have a synchronicity of occurrences, and you tend to remember those, but all the other events that or the background to that didn't have significance for you, and so you forget about those, and then you only remember the co-occurrences, and then they become special to you. And that's because humans are really good at extracting. We're creative, and we always are looking for meaning, how to get meaning. So that
another instance of concept of relativity. Okay, so what I really want to get down to, and I should have asked you beforehand, but I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Eldon Boyd.
The name sounds familiar, but you'll have to give me the background because I'm not familiar.
He was Navy intelligence scientist who helped come up with some of the, I guess, telepathy technology from the dolphins. He was on that project. And
was he in developing Medusa?
I'm not sure about that one per se, but he did have some projects that went black. He was excluded from. And
Did he give LSD to dolphins in the 70s?
I think...
no, that's the guy, right?
You're talking about another guy.
Okay.
I want to save him for another episode. But no, Dr. Eldon Boyd, he was Navy intelligence. He was actually killed, well, died officially in 2004. But he has a interview on YouTube, rare interview on YouTube. I'll put the link in the show.
Okay.
And anyone should listen to this. But he talked about, and I'm posing this question to you because you're the biologist, frequencies causing certain, I wouldn't say chemical reactions that would have a certain effect. For example, turning an element in our body to something that we need to something that we don't need, something poisonous. So basically, I guess this would be a reference to the calcium efflux or whatever elements that we have in our bodies, because I feel as though that the food that we are eating, especially the engineered ones, the genetically modified ones, have a special relationship to these frequencies, and it's killing us. It's making us sick. But Dr. Eldon Boyd spoke about sort of the way he described it was sort of alchemical, just like, okay, this person was hit with a frequency and they produced this chemical at a cellular rate, it starved these cells of this, and da-da-da-da, and this person had some very ill effects. So is this Agenda 21? I mean, it's not to appeal to your conspiracy theorist side of you, but...
Well, I will say that whereas I have skepticism over the extraction of information remotely, I have no doubt at all that these devices have amazing abilities to cause effects from a remote. In other words, they can do input effects much more easily than they can extract information. And the types of input effects that they can do are outside of the public domain. They're mind-blowing. Some of the ones that have happened to me, I'm even reluctant to speak about. They sound so science fiction, but yet then I hear other TIs, even without me having ever mentioned some of these effects, I hear remarkably similar allegations. So influencing effects on the, and even to some extent on the mind, and for sure on the muscles, on the heart, are definitely in the realm of what these devices can do. So input effects do not suffer from those same constraints that I was talking about that are true for the extraction effects. So I could say that the mind doesn't have much of a firewall against inputs, but there is a firewall against outputs from a distance.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Okay, which brings me to my next question. I'm going to have some anti-fluoride activists on the show here in the future, but since I have you here, from my research and the things that I've put together, about the fluoride and how it affects our pineal gland, the crystallization of the pineal gland. Now, this goes into a little bit of physics again. The thing about crystals and why crystals are so important is because it's needed for quantum computing. Diamonds are used in quantum computing because of the multifaceted structure of the crystal. And when you have impurities in crystals or diamonds, they hold electrons or photons, which are magnetically coded with information. It's the highest power of computing that we can conceptualize. Now, our pineal glands are crystallized in fluoride. Do you think this would make the brain hypothetically more easily accessible to something that would be able to pick up neurological emissions, signal emissions? I mean, I think it's a mind control ploy from the start. I
guess the way I would approach that question, again, with my scientist hat on, I would ask, I would look in the literature. I mean, I can do this. I can do a search. I have good access to the biomedical literature, which is why I've done extensive research on radio frequency effects on the human body, not in the context of requiring intermediary technology, just like people exposed to beams or fields of RF, including microwaves. There's a ton of literature out there. So the pineal question, the way I would approach that is, first I would say, do people have their pineal glands removed? Or is it a structure that's ever removed because of tumors or whatnot? And if that's true, what is the effect on someone of having their pineal gland removed? In other words, they would have to have hormones, probably. I'm not a neurologist, I'm a neuroscientist, but I could research that question. And so I would guess that the pineal is not really like the critical epicenter of the brain, the seat of the central seat of the soul, or what have you. In other words, but I don't know. I would have to look at that.
Well, some say that the pineal gland is responsible for a person's creativity and overall receptiveness of the outside world on a subliminal level and on a spiritual, holistic, natural ideologies, which,
So it's called the third eye, right?
It's the third eye, right. It has a certain mysticism to it, so...
Right.
And it's in our brain. It's there for a reason.
So my understanding of why it's called the third eye, again, from my scientist training, and basically the pineal gland in small brains, they're transparent to light to a certain degree. So light actually gets into the brain, and if you look in lizards, you'll see a lot of animals have a thinness on part of their skull too, where light actually goes in, and that's where the pineal gland is situated. And so it's called the third eye because it's actually photosensitive. And this is what entrains. Now, I might be wrong. If someone goes and fact checks here, I'm going based on like long ago learned textbook stuff. But basically, the pineal gland entrains with light and sets the photo period of an organism. That's why it's called the third eye.
I've read that too.
It's photosensitive. So once it's called the third eye, then it's easy to assign these more poetic functions to it.
Okay.
Again, I'm speaking from. So I think that it was called the third eye by zoologists because for other reasons, and then once people heard that it was called the third eye, that then it becomes like this Hindu type ancient belief system thing.
Energy of the Kundalini and all that goodness. Okay.
So I don't see the pineal as being. I mean, basically, the brain. You've got all of your basically like essential functions being controlled in hindbrain, brainstem, lower centers, but then for the rest of what we think of as cognition and emotion, there's no single part of the brain that's doing that. It's a massive network, and so you can't really take it as a reductionist thing. Our experiences of reality are held in this instantaneous network activity that it doesn't easily reduce down to parts doing different things. Now, at a rough level, different parts of the brain do different things, but what you said for creativity, there's no locus of creativity.
Right.
I mean, there's going to be a lot, going on in our visual center, in our prefrontal cortex, but it's a lot of stuff is involved in that.
Well, and what do you think about the mapping? I'm sorry. What do you think about the mapping projects? Because there has to be, there's so much more to it with the chemtrails and the fact that the aluminum does break the blood-brain barrier, and it does lace our neural pathways. I mean, are you seeing any of this? I mean, you do some toxicology. Can you?
Oh yeah,
can you say?
No. Let me make it clear. I am glad that you are asking these questions and attempting to put this together, and that people have these concerns. I'm glad for that, and I'm not trying to get in the way of that. That just happens to not be where I can move around in a nimble, comfortable way, or I choose not to because I'm focused, and I think there will come a time when I can speak on radio frequency bioeffects with authority, and I don't want to step outside of that zone, so that I can contribute in my way. I'm glad, and absolutely, if they're actually spraying metal particulates. Okay, I wanted to mention something. Have you heard? I heard that during the Iraq War, when they were doing intensive smart bombing and cruise missiles, that they were spraying metals in the air intensively over Baghdad and Iraq in order to help make the guidance systems and the radar work better. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, yes. The chemtrails started off as something called Project Cloverleaf. Now, Project Cloverleaf, they spray nano aluminum and nano metals in general into the air and pulse. Now, this is where, think about HAARP when I say this, and pulse energy through the atmosphere to plasmasize our air. Yes, it's part of the Star Wars defense initiative. If someone were to fly a nuke into American airspace, we have lasers to shoot them down because they'll be sensed instantly through the chemtrail, filled atmosphere. That's absolutely correct. But I want to add something that happened right after they sprayed this aluminum shaft. A lot of the enemy units, whole regiments, thousands of soldiers came out and surrendered to small groups of U.S. troops, all because they simultaneously heard the voice of Allah, and Allah told them to surrender their weapons. So what do you think about that one?
Well, what do I think about that? I think it's plausible, and certainly we have the technology to pull that one off. And I will say that electronic harassment, because I've never received V2K. However, under intense pulsed microwave attacks, I have gotten the microwave auditory effect at a screaming volume many times. I mean, I've heard the microwave auditory effect at low levels, but when you get hit hard enough to leave durable waveguide marks in your window, hard enough to make you go into a seizure, hard enough to thermally warm you or even burn you, when you get hit like that, you will hear an auditory effect that is in the same frequency as the pulsation pattern. So if they're turning the microwaves on and off, like with a window like that, that pulsation you will hear as a frequency in your ear. And I've gotten that incredibly loud, like my ears were next to an amplifier.
Yes,
Not to mention,
well, I was going to say that's based on a thermal expansion of the tissue, and I've been hit with that. I've had nosebleeds, ear bleeds. It's crazy. And while we brought that up, what do you think about the situation in Cuba, where the embassy, U.S. embassy?
Well, let's go to Cuba in a second, but let me go back for a second. You said about the Iraqi soldier, the story. I'm only using that term because I've only heard it as secondhand. It sounds completely plausible. It has a ring of truth to it, that story about the voice of God weapon. Of course, I can't confirm it myself, but when I was electronically harassed, because I say that in the past tense because I have not been since I fled Canada. I have not been targeted since then at all. But they were doing visual effects on me that I used to be reluctant to talk about, but a lot of TIs I've heard talk about. Basically, it was like the visual analog of V2K. I mean, they were doing through-wall projections, and in the video that I'm working on, I actually create a neuroscientific hypothesis for how that's possible. But to the unsuspecting victim, these effects have much stronger psychological effects. Once you realize what's going on, I mean, you still don't want your visual system to get microwaved, but the psychological aspect of it goes away, and then it just becomes what's left behind is physical torture. So yes, the psychological aspects, being aware helps you minimize the psychological aspects. If you're unaware, these things can completely terrorize you and drive you quickly to madness.
Knowing is half the battle, and I would agree with you.
Right.
We're gonna have to get together.
Knowing is half the battle for us.
Yeah.
On our side,
Yes.
Getting psychiatrists to stop calling people delusional would be half the global battle.
Agreed. And you're gonna have to get with me after the show. I can tell you all about Project Bluebeam. They used to do the shadow people with me.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
I was actually doing research and I came across the terminology shadow people from Native American mythology. And yes, and people on my wall, just shadow, just doing all sorts of things, pointing at me, laughing at me, and these sort of things. And I did a lot of research, and there's an element, biological element that floats around our eyes, our brains. They influence called magnetophosphines, I don't know. We'll have to get into that a little later.
I would like. I want to bring your attention to this presentation that I'm working on because.
Please, let's end the show with that.
I'll post it next week, and I'm very interested in that topic of visual stimulation because in my research on bioeffects, basically I found that almost essentially all of the claimed bioeffects of electronic harassment have support for being possible effects of radio frequency in the public domain. If you know where to look, the one commonly reported effect that has no public support in the public domain literature are induced visual effects from radio frequency signal, although the magnetophosphines that you're talking about, I've had an MRI and I saw flashes during the MRI.
Yes, yes.
And those are magnetophosphines. Anyway, I have a big section on the induced visual effects, and I take the skeptical scientist point of view, just so you know, but I am a TI. I was a TI. I still consider myself a TI, and I'm on the side of TIs for sure. I just think that my role is to stay in that skeptical scientist role. I think I add value in my own way to the community by taking on that role. But let's talk about Cuba.
Yes. Oh, yes. Please. The show's going to run a little long, but this is too good. Yeah. I want to hear your opinion on Cuba.
Well, I actually, and I also go into this in my presentation, but I ripped some drywall down in my apartment right at the end of my targeting because it became apparent to me over time that I was the victim of probably like 5 different modes of electronic harassment on the street, during mobbing, from very large weapons that left waveguide marks in my window, basically on an experiential level or on a like pain and bioeffects level. I discerned 5 categories of mode, or 5 modes basically. And one of the modes in my apartment left pinpoints of thermal pain on my skin that felt like campfire sparks landing on my skin and going out. That's what I was attended to. That's what caught my attention. And I followed those invisible beams. I could actually, follow them back to the wall and then carve out a small part of the drywall, and it would eliminate that. Okay, now, they did that to me for months, and I did these little experiments. After I really started resisting them, the people across the alley, they cranked that up on my second to last night in Canada to a debilitating level. But I was no longer willing to go out onto the street. So I got a pipe wrench and I started smashing the walls. And as I did that, I could feel myself disabling the field of energy in that part of the wall. And I, of course, kept the drywall samples. I still have them to this day. And when you look at those drywall samples under ultraviolet light, which is just something I did on a whim, you see structures inside the drywall that are, I want to use the term alien looking, because they give off a certain fluorescence pattern that is unworldly, and there's clearly structure in there, and there was deposition patterns on the surface of the drywall. And I believe that the drywall was actually acting as, if you look here, if you just take this part of the wall, basically a transmission medium to scatter and spread out a microwave attack. Instead of having a point emitter, it spreads it out so that it's harder to find. Now, that sounds like a possibility that they should consider for what happened in Cuba, just because this happened to me in my apartment, in a hotel room, and in my former friend's apartment. Mm-hmm. I collected samples from my apartment and the hotel room. I did thousands of dollars of damage to a hotel room where I was electronically harassed, and they never mentioned a thing. I destroyed that hotel room, room 2209 of the Coast Plaza Hotel and Suites. Now, after I finish this I'm pissed. I'm pissed. And you know what? Let them try to go after me. I'm pissed. Now,
yeah.
in a week after I finish this presentation, now that I have heard that the State Department is serious about they're taking these health attacks, or they're calling them attacks. I call them energy attacks. I think most TIs know that they were, or have a feeling that they were radio frequency attacks. But just, they need to know about this evidence, so I'm going to write to the Assistant Secretary of State, the Secretary of State, and Donald Trump, and the ambassador to Canada. I don't know which of those letters are going to go through, but I'm just going to write a one-page letter saying, hey, I have some drywall that I think was used in energy attacks in Canada. I want you to take a sample of it, send it to the right people, do tests on this stuff, and you might have a diagnostic test for technology that might be used in these kinds of attacks against U.S. and Canadian diplomats. Now, I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, but I don't feel scared to write that letter. I feel emboldened because I never committed any crimes, and I'm actually doing it for the sake of righteousness, for the right thing. I'm doing it for the right reason. So I'm very tuned into Cuba. Now, another thing you should know about Cuba is Dr. James C. Lin. The reference will be in my presentation. He is one of the experts on the microwave auditory effect. He is now Professor Emeritus. He wrote a paper in the IEEE Microwave magazine this month, published this month, where he links the incidents in Cuba to microwave attacks, basically saying that all of those effects could be caused by pulsed microwave energy, which I think was I'm so glad he wrote that article, to get it in the public domain, that an expert, we don't hear microwaves in reference to those attacks. I think the State Department suspects they were microwave attacks, but they must. That's an obvious suspicion or allegation. But they just, for some reason, maybe sonic attack is more acceptable to the common person. Microwave is a bit scarier.
Yeah. I was about to say that as well. They could have been masking what's really going on by saying it was sonic attack. But I was told if it were sonic attacks, there would be certain rupturing that would happen. Not necessarily immediately, but certain rupturing. Like, for example, I had Dr. Gregory Ford on my show last year. He's ex-DIA agent from Able Danger counter-terrorist group. And he was telling me about how the effects of sonic attacks work. And he said, after being hit by these things, sonic weapons, you don't feel the effects immediately. It's something that will degrade you over time, then boom, something in you will pop, a few days later, and these sort of things. I'm not too much up on the physics on that, as far as I am with everything else, but would it make a difference if it were sonic versus microwave politically? No,
it doesn't. It doesn't make a difference. And I'm going to write my letter carefully. I'm not trying to claim that I have the answers, but here's the significance of that evidence that I ripped out of the walls. It's like if if you went into if you were doing sleuthing the game Clue, and you suspected that the revolver was in that drawer, and then you look in that drawer and you find a revolver, that informs you that your overall theory about what was going on might be correct. With the drywall that I sampled, every place where I had cut, I later found fluorescent patterns ringing those places that I cut. When I made the cuts originally, I did not have knowledge of possible fluorescence. In other words, I made my cuts based on feeling thermal beams hitting me, and then only later did I find fluorescence in rings around my cuts. So I think my theory about something thermally causing thermal pain from those points has meaning, if you get my logic.
Yes.
In other words, I'm 100% correct. I mean, I'm 100% convinced that there's something going on with that drywall, and I just want the State Department to know about it.
Well, that actually brings up my next question. You make this so easy. The effects. Now, what this whole covert directed energy weapon ordeal, it's called the fingerprintless crime. Is supposedly not going to leave evidence, or it doesn't leave evidence, but really it does, because for example, I want to get into a forensic ideal here. For example, when you microwave meat versus, just having over a fire, there is cellular damage that looks different, correct? There's a forensics to it. You can tell when something's been microwaved or whether something's been hit with any other kind of frequency. There's cellular degradation, a fingerprint, correct?
Yes, I mean, I will put into different words what you're trying to say. I'll put into my own words. Absolutely, biomedical research has not funded biomarkers for EMF exposure. But as soon as they put that kind of resources behind it, and there's a reason to look, yes, they will come up with the biomarkers that will be the forensic tests. I have waveguide impressions that were dielectrically frozen into my window, which I show in my presentation. That's forensic evidence also. And also I used to notice that at injury sites where I would get hit by pencil beam, pulsatile, very painful directed energy weapons, it's like someone took a hot rubber band and snapped it through your body. I mean, that's what it felt like. It would cause changes to the hair. The hair would become singed almost, made thinner. Sometimes the tips would be fused. So there's going to be there are forensic traces. We just don't have the toolkit right now for it. But we will, because this is a serious problem. In some ways, we're leading the charge. We're ahead of the FBI. I mean, it's pathetic.
Well, those who fall behind typically are the culprits, I would say. So I know that I want to get as much evidence, or at least ways to get evidence. Think outside the box, I should say. And I'm good for that. I have the physical evidence.
I'm glad you're thinking outside the box. I encourage you to keep thinking outside the box, and you might be onto things, and you at least will get people looking. And more power to you if you're correct about some of the stuff that you're exploring. And I won't ever, I'm going to be open-minded, and look, I support what you're doing, and so I hope you're getting that message. I'm glad.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, what I was going to say, I really want to get that evidence out there. I'm known for thinking outside the box. I have the damage from it. They tried training me like a dog, sort of like a Pavlovian response, doing things that they liked. It was okay. You know, I get a certain sensation behind my left ear. And if I did something wrong, they let me know. I felt a stinging laser point burn behind my right ear. Now, I am not the kind of person to be trained, and I'm not a dog, and I do things my way, despite what anyone thinks, or says, or feels about it. I have scarring all throughout my right ear, and it's built up. I can't hear on my right ear. So I'm hoping to be able to submit that for some evidence later on.
Right.
So
you know, B.F. Skinner wrote a book called Beyond Freedom and Dignity. Now, I can't remember the subject matter of that book, but the title of that book almost makes it sound like he knew something about social control and targeting before his time. But you know, the Skinner box, the rat in an electrified box, basically, you know, where you can do operant conditioning on a rat. Anyway, I don't know if there's a connection there, but the title, I just recall the title, Beyond Freedom and Dignity.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, they thought they were gonna do that to me. No. But anyways, is there anything else that you want to do? I gotta wrap up the show.
This has been great. I'm looking forward to sharing my presentation with you.
Okay.
I want you to always remember, you know, because I think some people in the TI community get my stance. Other people, I've made some enemies, I believe, without even trying. But just so you know, I think there's a value. Basically, I think that activism. Okay, I'll wrap up this way. I'm not sure. You're connecting a lot of dots and exploring a lot of issues, and there's potential value in that. First of all, because you may be onto something that people will eventually look at, and there's also value in bringing different groups of activists that are outraged, because basically what we're outraged by the most is basically things being done outside of public knowledge, because there's danger in that, and
without our permission.
What's that?
And without our permission. I don't want anybody polluting my air. Nobody asked me anything.
Exactly. But I'm, as a piece of advice, you also have to balance that with you're connecting with people that are interested in those issues, but the mainstream public can be overwhelmed by the complexity of the Rube Goldberg machine, if you get my drift.
Yes.
So my personal approach is, and I've been very successful in talking, well, you know, successful. I mean, I was put into a psychiatric hospital when I was targeted because I was hit so hard I had to call for police help. But successful, you know, take that with a grain of salt. But I think I've been fairly successful at reaching people that are completely outside this issue. And one way to do that is to keep it simple. And so there's a balance. There's a balance, but we're all fighting the same fight. I see value in what you're doing. I want you to link, because the chemtrail issue is getting some legs now. I didn't even realize it, but after watching your video, it looks like it's getting legs. And the smart meter, people that are concerned about electrosmog. So bring those together, but when you talk to, there's also value in talking to completely outside audiences in a much more simplified way where you don't make tenuous connections. And that's where I stay in that realm, because you know, there's a scientific credibility. I have to be skeptical to maintain my mainstream scientific credibility. But I am a TI after all, and I was smoked with weapons that most people think are science fiction. So I'm navigating that corner of our issue. And I'm going to try to come out. I'll meet you in the middle.
Well, my thing is, I know that all these things are connected. The fluoride, the chemtrails, the GMO, they all have a certain place where they fit in, the puzzle, and they connect together and for an insidious purpose. And I have to do my best to try to figure that out. You said you make some enemies. I'm going through the industry looking for enemies. Okay, that's my stance.
I've made some enemies in the TI community before.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant. But there's no question. The last thing I'll say, there's no question that the forces that are behind this targeting. When the curtain was pulled back and I was targeted, there was a pre-existing network of people that was composed of thousands of people in the city of Vancouver. They easily pursued me across the border. So obviously there's a big thing, and they're going to have their toe in a lot of nefarious things, and there are going to be interconnections with corruption and technology. So keep up the good work. I think we need people asking the hard questions, and I'm glad you're doing it.
All right. Well, I have to thank you for being level-headed and keeping conspiracy theorists like me in check. And, again, thank you for being on the show.